Many a historical mystery begins with a simple question. How was that even possible? How could the ancient Egyptians have managed to carve their monstrous granite sarcophagi, each weighing an estimated 100 tons, out of single blocks of stone, and then place them in a labyrinthine complex deep underground? The stone monsters of the Serapeum of Sakkara are generally interpreted as oversized coffins in which the sacred Apis bulls were laid to rest. But how well does this interpretation actually match the archaeological evidence? After all, not a single mummy of an Apis bull has been found in the mysterious tomb to date, and many an alternative researcher considers it more likely that the massive granite boxes actually served a completely different purpose. And where conventional historiography has been exhausted, astonishing theories occasionally become the focus of discussions, such as the idea that the supposed sarcophagi are in fact the centerpiece of a lost high technology, or that the beings buried here were far more fearsome than any bulls. What would you need to transform gigantic granite blocks into perfectly crafted coffins with exact 90-degree angles and weighing around 100 tons? That's right, a few small hammers, soft copper chisels, and maybe a handsaw. Well, at least that's what the official doctrine says. But the truth is that the question of how the ancient Egyptians managed to work such hard material as granite with the simple means available in their time is still one of the greatest historical mysteries of all. And yet, this is just one of countless puzzles that the inhabitants of the Pharaonic Empire have left us. In fact, the true purpose of the Serapeum of Sakkara is still hotly debated today. The only thing that is certain is that deep below the desert floor of the legendary necropolis, a 340-meter-long catacomb slumbers with 28 niches leading off at right angles. Inside, we find another 24 imposing sarcophagi, which, with slight variations, are 4 meters long, 2.5 meters wide, and 3.5 meters high. According to estimates, each of these almost ridiculously large stone chests weighs between 70 and 80 tons, not including the no less massive coffin lids, which themselves weigh around 20 tons. These already impressive dimensions become even more astounding when we consider that the structures do not consist of countless individual parts, but were each carved out of a single block. But that's not all. The material used also came from Aswan, and thus from a quarry that was, believe it or not, 1,000 kilometers from Sakkara. So, the bottom line is that the granite was carefully shaped and smoothed, and then somehow transported to its intended destination. There, the colossal stones had to be maneuvered down into the depths without damage, dragged through the underground passageways, and anchored in their chambers, and partially walled in. The effort required for this undertaking can be cautiously described as high. But why did the ancient Egyptians go to so much trouble? The tomb of the Apis bull. Well, from a purely conservative research point of view, the matter is clear. The Serapeum embodies nothing more than an ancient site where the sacred Apis bulls were worshipped and buried after their death. No wonder, because after all, these were by no means just any cattle, but the very animals that, according to ancient Egyptian belief, represented the reincarnation of the god Ptah. As the main creator god, he is said to have once created man from clay, and in order to be considered his earthly embodiment, the Apis bulls had to stand out from other cattle on the outside by means of a special coat coloration. Herodotus reported that the Egyptians even built monumental colonnades and erected colossal statues for their sacred cattle, but the magnificently adorned bulls also took part in solemn processions. And as soon as an Apis bull died, a 70-day period of national mourning began for the cult followers, during which, among other things, they did not wash, avoided meat, and lamented loudly. The deceased bull was embalmed and mummified in an elaborate procedure that took about 60 days before it was finally taken to its final resting place. Which brings us back to the Serapeum. According to official historiography, it was built at the behest of Chamawaset, a son of Ramses II. So we are talking here about a time between 1281 and 1225 BC. But in fact, the existence of the Serapeum was to be completely forgotten for several centuries afterwards. This only changed in 1852 when the French Egyptologist Auguste Mariette awakened the gate of the Serapeum from its long historical slumber. And in detail, it didn't take long before Mariette realized what archaeological treasure he had just uncovered, for he was greeted right behind the entrance by a statue of the Apis bull. The other comparable statues and stele finally left no doubt that Mariette had come across the legendary Serapeum. But wouldn't you expect to find, well, some Apis bulls in the Apis bull tomb? Why were the sarcophagi empty? The French government was extremely enthusiastic about Mariette's sensational finds, which were perhaps partly due to the fact that the explorer immediately had around 7,000 artifacts from the Serapeum brought to Paris, where they continue to amaze countless visitors in the Louvre today. Mariette himself was no less astonished when he saw dozens of walled-up niches in the so-called Large Gallery, which contained 22 of the 24 gigantic granite boxes. The remaining 2 were enthroned in the side aisles of the Serapeum. But what about these massive monsters? Fortunately, the solution to the puzzle seemed to be close at hand. Almost all of the lids, each of which, as mentioned, weighed around 20 tons, had been pushed to the side. But Mariette's glimpse inside was followed by a great disappointment, because all of the objects were empty. However, there was still one untouched sarcophagus, still sealed with a massive lid. At first, Mariette and his companions tried to pry open the stone monster with sheer muscle power. But in the end, the men had to resort to dynamite, only to discover with amazement that this structure was also completely empty. But how was that even possible? After all, as mentioned, Mariette had already recovered thousands of artifacts in the Serapeum. Did the grave robbers really enter the labyrinthine complex just to steal the contents of the sarcophagi? But if this was the case, why did the site show no signs of forced entry? It is said that Mariette brooded over the apparently untouched yet empty tomb for the rest of his life. And yet, it could have been so simple. In fact, today's historians believe they know exactly why the supposed Apis bull coffins do not contain any Apis bull mummies. They were removed and destroyed by Coptic monks in ancient times to put an end to the Apis cult. It is considered certain that the Serapeum was closed by order of the Roman Emperor Honorius. But how on earth did the monks manage to push the massive coffin lids aside and then squeeze the bull bodies through the narrow gaps? And why did they even go to the trouble of placing the lid neatly back on the coffin in one case? But according to some reports, Mariette did discover something in connection with the granite sarcophagi. Several layers of small stone blocks were piled up on their lids, as if someone had tried to weigh the objects down even more. But why would anyone have done that? Well, to understand this, we have to venture into somewhat more borderline scientific territory. There are people who actually believe that it is not bulls that were buried in the Serapeum at all, but actual giants. The tomb of the giants? Where something was once locked away forever, rather than buried, many an alternative spirit finds themselves in the company of the biblical Nephilim. According to the scriptures, these were giant creatures conceived of divine beings and human women who brought untold suffering upon the world. Ultimately, God is said to have destroyed the Nephilim with a great flood, and apparently, according to the highly controversial theory, some of them were buried in the colossal granite coffins that now sit enthroned in the Serapeum at Sakkara. However, why the sarcophagi were empty at the time of their rediscovery, and where the alleged giants have disappeared to, is another matter entirely. The theory that the granite boxes do not represent coffins at all, but rather the centerpiece of ancient high technology. In detail, they are said to be nothing more than oversized batteries. Given that mysterious images such as the light bulb of Dendera would actually show us fully functional high-tech machines, the Serapeum was in fact an ingenious system for generating artificial light. In the corresponding interpretations, CO2 gas is mentioned, which exerted pressure on the quartz crystals and thereby generated electrical charges. These were finally scattered from the underground to the Earth's surface, transforming the whole of Sakkara into a swirling, glowing spectacle. So far, so controversial. But do gigantic hybrid creatures and lost technologies really represent the more reasonable approach to interpretation? Because if you like, the core argument that makes this interpretation as Apis bull tomb so controversial also applies here. There is simply no tangible evidence to support these, well, specialized theses. Because at the end of the day, we are dealing here too with nothing more than theories and ideas that are projected onto the site, and not with established facts. But if you now project your click onto the subscribe button, you can be sure that you will never miss a new video from us again. So please become part of our community to stay up to date from now on. See you soon!